The mirror breathes when I'm not looking at it. I don't mean fog. I don't mean condensation. I mean a slow, patient expansion and contraction, like lungs remembering how to work after a very long time pretending they didn't exist. I noticed it 3 nights ago at exactly 3:17 in the morning, when I heard my own voice whisper my name from the other side of the glass. It didn't speak it. It remembered it. The sound didn't pass through the air. It didn't vibrate the room. It didn't echo off the walls. It simply appeared inside my head, fully formed, intimate and precise, like a thought I hadn't meant to think but suddenly couldn't stop thinking. I reacted without thinking. My hand shot out toward the lamp, missed, clipped the edge of the nightstand, and sent it crashing to the floor. The bulb shattered. Glass skittered across the hardwood. For half a second the room was completely dark, and in that darkness I was certain, absolutely certain, that something moved inside the mirror. When the light finally came back on, the mirror was still. Perfectly still. Just my reflection staring back at me, mouth slightly open, eyes bloodshot and unfocused, chest rising far too slowly, like I'd forgotten how to breathe properly. I stood there barefoot among broken glass, listening to my own heartbeat pound in my ears and waiting for the whisper to come again. It didn't. That was the moment something settled into place inside me. Not understanding. Not yet. Just a quiet certainty that whatever had happened was not an accident, and it was not over. I should never have brought it into my house. But I'm already moving too fast. If you're listening to this now, don't skip ahead. I know the instinct. I know how stories like this usually go, how people warn you and beg you to pay attention. But there are rules here, real ones, and rules only help if you learn them before you break them. I didn't know them at first. I do now. And if this recording ends abruptly, or if there's a stretch of silence that feels just a little too long, then you'll understand why I'm leaving this behind. Let me start where it actually began. I inherited the mirror on a Tuesday. That detail matters. I don't know why yet, but it does. Tuesdays have always been empty days for me. Nothing important ever happens on Tuesdays. No birthdays. No holidays. No disasters. Just a quiet, forgettable space between Mondays and Wednesdays. I think that's why it chose one. The call came just after noon. Unknown number. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something about the vibration of my phone felt heavier than usual, like it wanted to be answered. The man on the other end introduced himself as a solicitor from a town I hadn't thought about in more than 20 years. Grey Haven. The name alone pulled a chill up my spine, sharp and sudden, like touching cold metal in winter. He told me my great-aunt Eliza had passed away. I told him I didn't know I had a great-aunt Eliza. There was a pause on the line. Not a dropped call. Not static. A human pause. Deliberate. Measured. Long enough to make me wonder if he was deciding how much to tell me. Then he said, very calmly, yes. That's common. He explained that Eliza had no children. No spouse. No immediate relatives left in Grey Haven. My name, however, had been found written repeatedly in a small leather-bound journal among her belongings. Because of that, ownership of a particular item had been legally transferred to me. Just one item. Not money. Not land. Not even the house. An antique mirror. I laughed then. A short, sharp sound that died halfway out of my mouth. Something about the way he kept calling it the mirror made my skin tighten across my shoulders. Not a mirror. Not her mirror. The mirror. Like a title. He asked if I would be coming to Grey Haven to collect it, or if I would prefer it shipped to my residence. I didn't hesitate. I chose shipped. Grey Haven sits at the edge of a forest locals call the Stillwood. Even as a kid, visiting distant relatives whose faces I can no longer recall, I remember the way the trees leaned inward, branches tangled together like fingers trying to lace. No wind ever moved them. No birds nested there. When you stood at the tree line, it always felt like you were interrupting something. Like the forest was listening. I don't remember Eliza. Not her voice. Not her face. Not even the sound of her name being spoken aloud. But I remember the house. Everyone did. They called it the Watch House. People said it like a joke, like a piece of local flavor meant to sound spooky, but no one ever laughed afterward. The windows faced inward instead of out, angled just slightly wrong, as if the house wasn't interested in the world beyond its own walls. No one ever explained why. The mirror arrived 3 days later. It was taller than I was, wrapped in layers of brown paper and coarse twine that smelled faintly of damp earth and something metallic, like rusted iron or old pennies left too long in a pocket. The delivery driver refused to bring it inside. He set it down on my porch, had me sign quickly, and didn't meet my eyes even once. When I cut the paper away, my hands were shaking. I told myself it was just nerves. Old things carried weight. History. Expectation. The frame was dark wood, heavier than it looked, cold to the touch even in the warm afternoon air. It was carved with shapes that refused to settle into meaning. They weren't symbols. They weren't letters. They weren't quite faces either. They looked more like impressions, as if something once pressed outward from inside the frame, leaving behind a suggestion of itself without fully emerging. The glass was flawless. Too flawless. My reflection looked wrong. Not warped. Not distorted. Not stretched. Delayed. When I lifted my hand, there was a fraction of a second before the reflection followed. Not enough to be obvious. Just enough to make something in my stomach drop. I told myself it was the lighting. The angle. My imagination filling in gaps that didn't matter. I carried it into the spare bedroom and leaned it against the wall, facing inward. I told myself I would sell it. Antique dealers love things with provenance. That was the lie I held on to. That night, I dreamed of Greyhaven. In the dream, the town was painfully bright, like the exposure had been turned up too high. Sunlight spilled everywhere with nowhere to rest. There were no shadows at all. Buildings sat flat against the ground like stage props. People moved through the streets smiling, their feet hovering inches above the pavement, never quite touching. They looked peaceful. Too peaceful. When I woke up, my mouth tasted like copper, and my jaw ached like I'd been clenching my teeth for hours. I didn't realize I was standing in front of the spare bedroom door until my knees started to ache. The mirror was uncovered. I didn't remember unwrapping it. There was a tapping sound coming from inside the glass. Once. I froze. Twice. My throat tightened. 3 times. I stepped closer before I could stop myself. The tapping stopped immediately. My reflection smiled. I didn't. That was the first time I understood the mirror wasn't passive. It was waiting. I didn't sleep after that. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, every nerve in my body tuned toward the spare bedroom down the hall. The house made its usual nighttime sounds, pipes settling, wood contracting, the faint hum of electricity in the walls, but underneath it all was something else. A presence. Not a sound exactly, more like pressure, as if the air itself was waiting for instructions. I didn't turn off the light. I didn't close my eyes for more than a few seconds at a time. Every time I did, I felt certain that if I slept, the mirror would see me do it. That thought didn't come from anywhere specific. It just arrived, fully formed, heavy with certainty. Like a memory I hadn't lived yet. Morning came slowly. When the sun finally rose, the house felt different. Not safer. Just quieter in a way that felt intentional, like someone holding their breath until I noticed. I avoided the spare bedroom all day. I worked from home, but I barely remember answering emails or finishing tasks. My attention kept drifting back to the mirror. I could feel it down the hall, occupying space in a way furniture shouldn't. Every so often, I caught myself turning my head toward the spare room without realizing I'd done it. Late in the afternoon, I opened the journal again. This time, I read past the rules. The entries were inconsistent. Some were dated decades apart. Others skipped only days. Eliza's handwriting changed subtly over time, sometimes tight and precise, sometimes rushed and uneven, as if written with shaking hands. She wrote about watching. About keeping the house quiet. About learning when not to look. One entry stopped me cold. It described the delay. Not just the reflection lagging behind movement, but the feeling that followed. The sense of being copied. Of something practicing. She wrote that the mirror never took anything all at once. It observed. It rehearsed. It waited until it could do you better than you could do yourself. I shut the journal and rubbed my eyes. When I looked up, I was standing in front of the spare bedroom door. I don't remember walking there. The door was open. The mirror stood exactly where I'd left it, uncovered, reflecting the empty room behind me. For a moment, everything seemed normal. The delay was barely noticeable. My reflection followed my movements faithfully, almost eagerly. Almost. I told myself I was imagining it. Then I noticed the eyes. They weren't quite right. They tracked me too smoothly. Too deliberately. Like something trying to predict where I would move next instead of reacting to where I already was. I took a step back. My reflection didn't. It stayed where it was for just a fraction of a second too long. Then it stepped forward. My heart slammed against my ribs. I stumbled back into the hallway and slammed the door shut, leaning my weight against it as if that could stop what was happening inside. Nothing followed. No sound. No impact. No tapping. Just silence. That night, I dreamed again. This time, I wasn't just observing Greyhaven. I was walking through it. The streets were clean. Too clean. Every surface looked polished and used. The people smiled at me as I passed, their expressions gentle and empty. None of them cast shadows. I tried to speak to them, but my voice felt wrong, like it didn't belong to me. When I reached out to touch one of them, my hand passed through, like fog. Behind them, at the end of the street, stood the watch house. Its windows were dark. I woke up screaming. The taste of copper was stronger this time. The next morning, I noticed scratches on my arms. Thin, shallow lines, like I'd brushed against something sharp in my sleep. They ran parallel, 3 on each forearm. I stared at them for a long time, trying to remember how I'd gotten them. I couldn't. The journal had a new entry. I know this because I didn't recognize it at first. The handwriting was mine. Not similar. Not close. Mine. The entry was short. You stood too close today. My stomach dropped. I flipped back through the pages, my hands trembling. I knew I hadn't written it. I was sure of that. But the longer I stared at the words, the less certain I became. I could remember the act of writing it, vaguely, like recalling something done while half asleep. That scared me more than the mirror ever had. I started setting rules for myself. I covered the mirror whenever I wasn't in the room. I avoided looking at it directly. I slept with the spare bedroom door locked and a chair wedged beneath the handle, even though part of me knew that wouldn't matter if it really wanted out. For a few days, it worked. The house felt lighter. The pressure eased. I started sleeping in short stretches again, waking often but at least dreaming less. Then my sister called. I almost didn't answer. We hadn't spoken since her visit. Every time I tried to call her, it went straight to voicemail. Seeing her name on my phone felt wrong, like it was happening out of order. She sounded normal. Too normal. She asked if I'd been feeling okay. She said she'd had strange dreams since visiting, dreams where she was standing in front of a mirror that didn't show her face. I told her not to come over. She laughed it off. She came anyway. She stopped in the hallway again, staring at the covered shape in the spare room. "Why do you still have that thing?" she asked. I told her not to touch it. She did. The sheet slid off easily, like it had been waiting for her. The mirror was dark. Not reflective. Not black. Empty. She frowned and waved her hand. Nothing. Then the glass rippled. Her reflection appeared, pressed flat against the inside, palms splayed, mouth open in a silent scream. "Help me." I felt it then. The pull. Like gravity shifting direction. I dragged her out of the room, slammed the door, and threw the sheet back over the mirror. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely grip the fabric. She didn't remember any of it. She left early. She hasn't answered my calls since. That was when I decided I couldn't stay. Greyhaven had answers. I didn't want them. But I needed them. I left the house before sunrise. I didn't pack much. Just a backpack, the journal, my phone, and the uneasy certainty that leaving didn't mean escaping. As I locked the door behind me, I felt the house watching, every window reflecting the pale gray of the morning sky. For a moment, I had the irrational urge to turn back, to apologize to it, like you might to a person you're abandoning. I didn't. The road to Greyhaven curved along the coast, the ocean hidden behind cliffs and fog. The town emerged slowly, buildings materializing out of the mist as if they'd been waiting to be noticed. It was smaller than I expected. Older, too. Wooden storefronts, salt-stained paint, streets worn smooth by decades of rain and footsteps. There were people out, but not many. They moved with the same careful deliberation I'd seen in my dreams, heads down, eyes forward, as if looking too closely at anything might invite trouble. I parked near the center of town and stepped out into the cold air. Immediately, I felt it again. That pressure. Stronger here. Like the mirror's presence had been diffused into the atmosphere itself, spread thin but everywhere. I started with the library. The building was old brick, its windows clouded with age. Inside, the air smelled like dust and paper and something faintly metallic. A woman sat behind the front desk, her hair pulled back tight, her expression politely blank. I asked about local history. She watched me carefully as I spoke, her eyes lingering just a second too long on my face, like she was comparing it to something she'd seen before. She handed me a stack of records without a word. Most of them were mundane. Fishing logs. Census reports. Newspaper clippings. But every few years, like clockwork, there were gaps. Missing weeks. Sometimes months. When records resumed, there were fewer names. Or the same names, repeated in different handwriting. I found an article dated nearly a century ago. A photograph accompanied it, a group of townspeople standing in front of a building labeled the Watch House. Their faces were wrong. Not distorted. Not monstrous. Just vacant. Smiling in a way that didn't reach their eyes. The article mentioned a protective structure built to safeguard the town during periods of instability. It didn't explain what that meant. It didn't have to. I felt watched as I copied down the address. The watch house stood at the edge of town, perched on a rocky outcrop overlooking the sea. Up close, it looked less like a house and more like a bunker. Thick stone walls. Narrow windows. A heavy door reinforced with iron bands. It was unlocked. Inside, the air was cold and damp. The walls were lined with mirrors. Not identical, but similar. Tall. Framed. Every one of them covered with heavy cloth. In the center of the room stood a podium, and on it, another journal. I opened it. The handwriting was different from Eliza's. Older. More formal. It spoke of balance. Of an agreement. The mirrors were not portals, exactly. They were anchors. Points of overlap between what is and what watches. The town had learned, long ago, that something beneath the surface of reality could be appeased. Fed carefully. Reflected, but never allowed to step fully through. The watch house existed to enforce rules.